The sky over Sayula is tearing apart. It's 8:30 in the morning, February 22nd, 2026. A Mexican military helicopter, sent to provide air cover for one of the most important raids in the country's history, shudders as high-caliber rounds punch through its hull. The pilots are losing control. They're going down, forced into an emergency landing somewhere in the municipality below. And in the dense, mountainous forest of Tapalpa, the most hunted man in the Western Hemisphere is running. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, has just been flushed from his hideout. For years he was a ghost, a name without a face, a man who built a criminal empire so powerful that the United States formally designated his organization a terrorist group in late 2024. There is a $15 million bounty on his head. But the men closing in on him this morning aren't chasing a reward. They are Mexican Army Special Forces. They have already punched through a perimeter guarded by cartel soldiers carrying military-grade rocket launchers. The stakes couldn't be higher. If El Mencho slips into those trees and disappears, the government loses everything. Its credibility, its momentum, its case that this man can ever be caught. And if they do catch him, the United States and Mexico both know exactly what comes next. The country will burn. To understand what happened in those highlands, you have to go back, because this moment, this morning, didn't happen by accident. It was built, piece by piece, over years. The capture of El Mencho was not a lucky break or a tip that came in overnight. It was the end of a long, careful operation designed to strip away everything that kept him hidden: his money, his logistics, his network of people who made sure no one could find him. By 2025, both the US and Mexico had quietly changed their approach. They stopped chasing foot soldiers. They stopped making arrests that barely slowed anything down. They realized something. You don't catch a ghost by hunting the man. You catch him by dismantling the system that makes him invisible. The turning point comes in January 2026. The Pentagon launches a new task force, the Joint Interagency Task Force Counter Cartel. Its director, a brigadier general, is clear about what makes this unit different. They aren't running traditional drug enforcement. They're using methods borrowed from counterterrorism. Advanced surveillance, constant monitoring of cartel communications and vehicle movements. Their sole focus is mapping the exact location of the CJNG's top leadership across the rugged terrain of Jalisco. Everything they find gets passed directly to the Mexican army. But technology alone can't get you inside the inner circle. The real breakthrough comes from something much more human. Investigators find a crack in El Mencho's armor, not in his security detail, not in his communications, but in something he can't fully control: his need for human connection. After years of living like a ghost, completely cut off from the world, that need becomes his vulnerability. Intelligence officers shift their focus away from Mencho himself and onto someone close to one of his romantic partners, a trusted associate. They watch this person, they track his movements, and on the afternoon of February 20th, 2026, that surveillance pays off. Military intelligence watches as the associate escorts the romantic partner to a remote, secluded property in the forest outside Tapalpa, about 130 kilometers south of Guadalajara. Her arrival is the first confirmation, but it's her departure that seals his fate. On the evening of February 21st, the romantic partner leaves the property, and when she goes, she takes something with her that no security protocol can replace. She leaves El Mencho behind with a fraction of his usual protection. The moment the task force has been waiting for has arrived. The most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere is alone in a wooden cabin in the mountains, with a smaller guard than usual and no idea what's coming. The order is given. The operation is go. At 6:30 in the morning on February 22, the trap snaps shut. Mexican Army Special Forces, backed by a National Guard Rapid Reaction Unit, move in and encircle the cabin. The element of surprise lasts seconds. The cartel security detail explodes into action. High-caliber weapons, rocket launchers, a wall of coordinated fire designed to stop the advance cold. 4 cartel members are killed in the opening exchange, but the violence buys El Mencho exactly what he needs. While his men hold the line, he slips out a back route, a pre-planned escape path he likely rehearsed for this exact moment, and disappears into the forest. The operation fractures. Special Forces teams split up and push into the forest, tracking El Mencho through steep, dense terrain. Then, about 2 hours in, it happens. The military helicopter providing air cover takes fire. The damage is catastrophic. The pilots are forced into an emergency landing in Sayula. For the commanders watching this unfold, that moment lands like a gut punch, because they've seen it before. 11 years earlier, on May 1, 2015, almost the exact same thing happened. During a raid on a CJNG position, cartel fighters used a Russian-made rocket launcher to shoot down a Mexican military helicopter. 9 soldiers died, and in the chaos that followed, El Mencho walked away. That failure haunted the Mexican security apparatus for a decade. Now, in 2026, the same scenario is playing out in the same mountains. The helicopter is down, the target is running, and the commanders have to make a brutal call: pull back to help the downed crew, or keep pushing forward into the trees. They hold. The ground teams don't break. They don't pull back to the crash site. They tighten the perimeter and keep moving. And at 10:15 in the morning, it pays off. Pursuit teams find El Mencho hiding deep in the undergrowth. A final firefight erupts. When it's over, Oseguera and 2 of his remaining bodyguards are down, critically wounded by federal gunfire. The most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere is in custody. But the crisis doesn't end there. It accelerates. El Mencho is bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot wounds. He needs emergency trauma care, fast. A medical transport helicopter is loaded up and pointed toward Guadalajara. The plan is simple: get him to the city, get him into surgery, keep him alive long enough to face justice. It should be a straight flight. It won't be. The system reacts faster than the helicopter can fly. Intelligence starts pouring into the command center. Armed CJNG cells are massing in Guadalajara. The cartel knows where the helicopter is going. They're preparing to intercept it the moment it enters the city's airspace. Flying into Guadalajara now means flying into an ambush. The pilots are ordered to divert. They turn away from Jalisco and head toward Morelia, in the neighboring state of Michoacán. That detour costs time, and time is the one thing El Mencho no longer has. At 12:45 in the afternoon, somewhere in the sky between Tapalpa and Morelia, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes bleeds to death. The moment the news breaks, the questions start, and some of them are deeply uncomfortable. Sources within the intelligence community raise a possibility that nobody in the government is willing to address directly. That the decision for El Mencho to not survive was made before the raid ever began. A dead or alive directive, spoken or unspoken. Critics point to the fact that he died during transport, not in the firefight, as potential evidence of something darker. Either a deliberate refusal to provide the immediate care that might have saved him, or worse, something that looks very much like an execution. None of it has been proven, but the questions aren't going away. The mystery doesn't stop there. For years, rival cartel factions had been spreading a different story, that El Mencho was already dead, killed by kidney failure long before any raid ever happened. That rumor was so convincing, so persistent, that it triggered a violent internal split within the CJNG back in 2022. The 2026 autopsy officially lists gunshot wounds as the cause of death, but the location where he was found raises questions that won't go away. A remote forest cabin deep in the mountains, far from any hospital or modern medical facility. It lines up with the theory that El Mencho had been seriously ill for years, hiding not just from the government, but from his own deteriorating body. But while the man dies in the sky, his empire is already moving on the ground. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, barely an hour after his death, retaliatory attacks erupt across Jalisco, Michoacán, and Guanajuato. This is not a spontaneous reaction, it is coordinated, organized, military in its precision. The man behind it is Hugo Macias Ureña, known as El Tuli, identified by Mexican defense officials as the CJNG's top financial operator and strategic coordinator. Within an hour of his boss bleeding out in a helicopter, El Tuli effectively turns large parts of Mexico into a war zone. El Tuli deploys foot soldiers and a fleet of heavily armored trucks, massive, modified vehicles the cartel calls monstruos. They use them as mobile roadblocks, rolling them into position across highways and city streets to shut down movement and dominate the ground. The goal is clear: lock the country down, prevent the government from moving anything, anywhere. Within hours, cartel gunmen have erected more than 250 blockades across 20 different Mexican states. What follows is a campaign of pure terror. In Guadalajara, one of Mexico's largest cities, residents describe the streets going silent, empty, a ghost town in the middle of the afternoon. Cartel operatives set gas stations on fire. They torch public buses in the streets. Flights out of Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta are completely suspended, stranding thousands of travelers with no way out. The violence spreads. In Michoacán, fuel trucks are burned, a deliberate strike against the country's logistics network and emergency services. In Guanajuato, gunmen set pharmacies on fire, not for profit, not for territory, but purely to terrify the people living there. The reach extends all the way to Baja California, where port blockades choke off cross-border trade and international movement. The message is not subtle. The cartel is everywhere, and it wants you to know it. The human cost is staggering. At least 73 people are killed in the aftermath of the February 22 raid. The violence hits hardest in Jalisco, a state that is supposed to be preparing to host the World Cup. A red alert is declared. In 6 separate coordinated ambushes, cartel forces kill 25 members of the Mexican National Guard. The head of the cartel is gone, but the body is still moving, still killing. The nervous system is fully intact. And behind all of it, the rockets fired into Tapalpa, the burning buses in Guadalajara, the monstros rolling through the streets, is money. Staggering amounts of it. The 2026 operation was built, in part, on the financial wreckage uncovered during U.S. prosecutions of the Oseguera family. And those trials revealed just how deep the money goes. In 2025, El Mencho's son, Rubén Oseguera González, known as El Menchito, goes to trial in Washington, D.C. Court documents identify him as the architect of the cartel's fentanyl strategy. He pledged, in his own words, to flood the United States with counterfeit OxyContin pills, and he delivered. He is held responsible for moving 50 metric tons of cocaine and 1,000 tons of methamphetamine. The court sentences him to life in prison and orders a $6 billion forfeiture. $6 billion. That is the scale of the fortune behind this organization. The same fortune that paid for the rocket launcher used to shoot down a Mexican military helicopter in 2015, an attack El Menchito personally directed to help his father escape. The money didn't just flow through weapons and drugs. It moved through sushi restaurants, tequila brands, and advertising firms. El Mencho's daughter, Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez, known as La Negra, ran the cartel's financial operation through 6 legitimate-looking businesses: a sushi lounge, a tequila label, an advertising company, a resort property. On paper, they looked like normal enterprises. In reality, they were washing cartel money, funds that went directly toward purchasing safe houses for the organization's leadership. When La Negra was arrested, she was wearing a Rolex, a Louis Vuitton coat, and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag. All of it bought with money from an organization responsible for moving 1/3 of all drugs entering the United States. Her brother was running a billion-dollar fentanyl pipeline from a courtroom in Washington, and her father, the man who built all of it, died alone, bleeding in the back of a diverted helicopter somewhere over the mountains of western Mexico. The empire was global. The end was anything but glamorous. The illusion that the CJNG was untouchable didn't just crack in the mountains of Jalisco. It cracked in the suburbs of Southern California. El Mencho's son-in-law, a man known as El Guacho, saw the walls closing in and made a decision. He faked his own death in Mexico, slipped across the border, and set himself up in a luxury safe house in Riverside, California. When U.S. authorities finally arrested him, they found $2.2 million in cash hidden inside the residence. The cartel wasn't just hiding in remote mountain forests. It was living quietly in American neighborhoods. Back in Tapalpa, the weapons seized after the raid told their own story. Mexican defense officials recovered 2 rocket launchers, 7 high-caliber rifles, and multiple armored vehicles from the compound. The men defending El Mencho wore uniforms, actual uniforms, bearing the insignia of the CJNG Special Forces High Command. This was not a gang. This was a paramilitary force. The rocket launchers capable of downing helicopters were Russian-made. The .50 caliber rifles, weapons specifically designed to destroy aircraft rotors, were purchased in places like Portland, Oregon, and smuggled south across the border. The cartel's supply chain ran straight through the United States. The morning of February 23rd brings one more victory. After a night of chaos, Mexican military forces track down Hugo Macias Ureña, El Tuli, and kill him in a separate confrontation. The man who orchestrated the blockades, the ambushes, the burning cities, dead within 24 hours of his boss. In less than 2 days, the Mexican military has taken out both the supreme leader of the CJNG and the man running its operations on the ground. The White House confirms it. On February 23rd, the press secretary issues an official statement acknowledging U.S. intelligence support for the operation. Both governments are firm on one point: no American personnel were physically present during the raid. But the official descriptions of how closely the U.S. task force worked with the Mexican military in real time, feeding intelligence, coordinating movements, advising on the ground situation as it unfolded, raise a question that neither government is eager to answer. At what point does intelligence support become something more? The line between advising and participating has rarely looked this thin. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes is gone. The ghost who evaded the Mexican government for a decade has finally been caught and killed. On paper, it's the biggest victory in the country's war against the cartels in years. But the burning pharmacies tell a different story. So do the 250 blockades. So do the 25 dead National Guardsmen. The man is dead, but the machine is still running. The speed and precision of the retaliation, coordinated across 20 states within an hour of his death, proves that the CJNG was never really about one man. It is a system, a multi-billion-dollar system built on fentanyl, money laundering, and military-grade weapons. And systems don't die when you cut off the head. What comes next may be worse. The power vacuum left by El Mencho's death has already set off a succession crisis between armed factions in Jalisco and Michoacán. Security analysts aren't predicting calm, they're predicting fragmentation, a new, more chaotic phase of violence, no longer controlled by one central figure, but fractured across competing groups with no reason to show restraint. For a decade, the fear of El Mencho kept a certain brutal order. That order is gone now. And in the world of the cartels, the most dangerous moment is not when a man is in power. It's the moment right after he falls. In the end, the most sophisticated cartel security apparatus in the world wasn't defeated by superior firepower or years of surveillance. It was undone by a visit, a romantic visit, tracked through a single trusted associate, led soldiers to a remote cabin in the mountains. The most hunted man in the Western Hemisphere was brought down not by a massive intelligence breakthrough, but by his own need for human connection. And yet, he bled out in the back of a helicopter, and the system he built didn't miss a beat. The safe houses in California are still standing. The anti-aircraft weapons bought in Oregon are still out there. The monstros are still rolling. The money is still moving. You can kill a man, you cannot kill a billion-dollar machine with a single bullet. The ghost is gone, but the country is still burning.